The Vatican Seps, Forbidden Feast. Imagine crouching in the shadows of the Vatican, the air thick with the scent of incense and something far more intoxicating. The year is 1501 AD, and through the flickering candlelight, you're about to witness a scene so depraved it would make ancient Romans blush. The rustle of silk against stone mingles with laughter, echoing through halls where saints once walked. Your heart pounds as you realize you're a silent spectator to the most scandalous night in papal history. An orgy so shocking it would be forever known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. The aroma of roasted chestnuts fills the October air, a humble scent that will soon become a prop in a performance destined to stain the reputation of the Catholic Church. In the private chambers of Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, 50 courtesans are preparing for an evening that will be meticulously recorded in a secret diary, a forbidden confession buried for centuries beneath layers of pious prayers in the Vatican archives. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you're as captivated by the hidden truths of history as I am, smash that like button and subscribe to join our community of history detectives, the Love Sala One. And please leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. It's incredible to think we're exploring these ancient tales together, connected across time and space by a shared curiosity about the past. The man who would become known as the most perverted pope in history, Rodrigo Borgia, was born in the Spanish town of Ceuta in 1431. Destiny would carry him far from those humble beginnings to the marble corridors of Vatican power. His uncle Alfonso de Borgia was already climbing the ecclesiastical ladder, and when he became Pope Calixtus III in 1455, young Rodrigo's fate was sealed. At just 25, Rodrigo was made a cardinal deacon, not through divine calling but through the ancient art of nepotism that flowed through the church's veins like poison. The young Spaniard arrived in Rome with ambition burning in his chest, ready to devour every opportunity the eternal city offered. Late 15th century Rome was a city of stark contradictions. By day, pilgrims knelt in reverence before gilded altars, their prayers rising to heaven. By night, the same streets witnessed transactions that would make merchants of flesh wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. The papal court had become a marketplace where everything, including salvation, had a price tag written in gold ducats. Rodrigo Borgia understood this world better than anyone. He accumulated wealth with the methodical precision of a spider spinning its web, his lifestyle resembling that of a Renaissance prince rather than a man of God. He hosted lavish banquets and kept a succession of mistresses who bore him children with the regularity of seasonal harvests. The most significant of these relationships was with Venanza dei Catanei, a Roman noblewoman whose beauty was matched only by her understanding of papal politics. Between 1474 and 1482, she bore him 4 children who would become central figures in the dark drama about to unfold: Juan, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Joffre. Each child was a chess piece in Rodrigo's grand game of power, their lives sacrificed on the altar of their father's ambition. Even as a cardinal, Rodrigo's behavior scandalized Rome. No small feat in a city where scandal was as common as morning bread. Pope Pius II wrote him a scathing letter in 1460, condemning his conduct. But shame was a luxury Rodrigo could not afford. He had a papacy to win, and moral reservations were simply obstacles to be overcome. The conclave of August 1492 unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of corruption. Behind the closed doors of the Sistine Chapel, beneath Michelangelo's future masterpiece, gold changed hands, promises were whispered, and benefices were distributed like communion wafers. When the smoke finally cleared, Rodrigo Borgia emerged as Pope Alexander VI, a victory achieved through what contemporaries openly acknowledged as simony, the buying and selling of holy offices. The Romans surprisingly celebrated. They were accustomed to their Spanish cardinal and anticipated a pontificate of magnificence and energy. Bonfires illuminated the 7 hills, torchlight processions wound through ancient streets, and triumphal arches rose like prayers made manifest in stone and wood. The new pope's coronation at St. Peter's Basilica was greeted with the greatest ovation any pontiff had ever received. Alexander VI began his reign with measures that seemed to promise reform. He restored order to Rome's streets, which had seen over 200 assassinations in just a few months. He established districts with magistrates empowered to maintain peace and personally heard grievances every Tuesday, dispensing justice with admirable efficiency. For a brief moment, it seemed that divine providence had placed the right man on the throne of St. Peter. But power, like wine, reveals character rather than creating it. Alexander's initial reforms were quickly overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of advancement for his children, particularly his sons, Juan and Cesare. Juan was made Duke of Gandia in Spain, and Cesare, despite being only 18, was appointed to the prestigious Archbishopric of Valencia and later elevated to a cardinal, positions he treated as stepping stones rather than sacred callings. The papal apartments during Alexander's reign became a theater where the sacred and profane performed an obscene ballet. Dinners stretched late into the night, accompanied by entertainment that pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior, even by Renaissance standards. Alexander's mistress, Julia Farnese, known as Julia la Bella for her extraordinary beauty, moved through the Vatican corridors as freely as any cardinal, her presence a constant reminder that the Pope's spiritual vows had been trampled underfoot by earthly desires. Into this world of contradictions arrived Johann Burchard, a meticulous observer, armed with a quill and an unforgiving memory. As papal master of ceremonies, a position that granted him intimate access to the most secret moments of papal life, Burchard maintained a detailed diary, his diarium, which recorded both magnificent ceremonies and scandalous conduct. He was no romantic. He possessed the soul of an accountant and the eye of a court stenographer. His writings lack flourish, but carry the weight of truth precisely because of their dry, matter-of-fact tone. He recorded papal ceremonies with the same attention to detail that he devoted to papal scandals, creating a documentary record that would eventually make even hardened Vatican archivists uncomfortable. Burchard occupied a unique position. He was not high enough to participate in the corruption, yet not low enough to be excluded from witnessing it. Like a shadow cast by candlelight, he moved through the Vatican's most private spaces, observing everything while appearing to matter very little. This invisibility became his greatest asset as a chronicler of papal vice. By the late 1490s, the Borgia family's behavior had begun to attract negative attention throughout Europe. Juan, the Duke of Gandia, proved as corrupt as his elevation was undeserved. Stories circulated about his cruelty and sexual excesses. The golden boy of the Borgia dynasty was becoming a liability that even his devoted father could not ignore. The events of June 14, 1497, changed everything. Juan's body was discovered floating in the Tiber River, his throat cut and his body bearing 9 wounds. The murder sent shockwaves through Rome and struck Alexander with grief so profound that observers wondered if divine justice had finally visited the Borgia family. For 3 days and nights, the Pope refused food and sleep, weeping like a broken man. In his anguish, Alexander announced a program of church reform. He called for measures to restrain the luxury of the papal court and suppress simony and concubinage. For a brief moment, it seemed that personal tragedy might accomplish what years of criticism had failed to achieve. But grief, like everything else in Alexander's character, proved temporary. Within months, the reform proposals were forgotten, and the Pope's attention turned to his surviving son Cesare, whose iron will and ruthless ambition would now drive the family's agenda. If Juan had been Alexander's heart, Cesare was his sword, sharp, cold, and utterly without conscience. Caesar possessed a magnetism that drew admirers and enemies alike, tall, handsome, and with an intelligence bordering on genius. He had initially been destined for the church like his father, but his talents lay in warfare and statecraft, not theology. He resigned his cardinalate in 1498, the first cardinal in history to voluntarily abandon the sacred office, and set his sights on secular power. The political landscape of Italy provided Cesare with opportunities that would have challenged even Machiavelli's imagination. Through a combination of siege warfare, assassination, and political manipulation, he carved out a domain in central Italy that made him one of the most powerful men in Europe. His methods were so effective that Niccolò Machiavelli would later use him as the model for the prince, admiring Caesare's ability to combine cruelty with efficiency in the pursuit of political goals. But such success required resources that even papal coffers could not easily provide, leading Alexander to increasingly creative methods of fundraising. The sale of indulgences, church offices, and even cardinal hats became systematic during Alexander's later years. Wealthy families could purchase ecclesiastical positions for their sons, effectively buying salvation along with social status. The College of Cardinals expanded not through spiritual merit, but through financial contributions. Rome during this period resembled a city under occupation by its own rulers. The Borgia family treated the papal states as their personal kingdom, with Alexander as patriarch and Cesare as crown prince. Lucrezia, despite the later rehabilitation of her reputation, was used as a political pawn in marriage alliances that served family interests. Her first marriage was annulled on grounds of impotence when political circumstances changed, and she was quickly remarried. Her second husband, Alfonso of Biscay, was later murdered, possibly on Cesare's orders, when that alliance no longer served Borgia interests. The Vatican apartments during these years became a stage for increasingly elaborate entertainments. These gatherings served multiple purposes beyond mere amusement. They were demonstrations of papal wealth and power, opportunities for political negotiation, and testing grounds for loyalty among Alexander's supporters. Cardinals who participated were implicated in his behavior, making them reluctant to criticize or betray him. The autumn of 1501 found the Borgia family at the height of their power and perhaps their corruption. Cesare had successfully completed his conquest of the Romagna, and Alexander had weathered various political crises. It was in this atmosphere of triumph and moral decay that Cesare Borgia conceived what would become known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. The exact motivation for the event remains unclear, but it occurred on October 31st, 1501, All Hallows' Eve, when the boundary between sacred and profane was traditionally at its thinnest. The symbolism was perfect on a night dedicated to remembering the dead. The Borgia family was about to commit acts that would kill whatever remained of papal dignity. Caesare's apartments in the Vatican were magnificently decorated with frescoes, depicting scenes from classical mythology and Christian history, creating an ironic backdrop for what was about to unfold. The guest list revealed the breadth of the corruption. Cardinals, who should have been spending the evening in prayer mixed with Roman nobles whose wealth had purchased their silence. But the true stars of the evening were the 50 courtesans Cesare had assembled. These were not common prostitutes, but sophisticated women who understood the delicate art of providing pleasure while maintaining the discretion required by powerful men. Johann Burchard was present that evening, not as a participant but as an observer. His official duties placed him in the perfect position to witness and record events that others might have preferred to forget. His account, written in Latin with the clinical detachment of a medical examiner, preserves details that illuminate both the specific events of that evening and the broader moral climate of Alexander's papacy. According to Burchard's meticulous record, the evening began conventionally with dinner. The atmosphere began to change as the servants cleared away the plates and the evening's true entertainment commenced. The 50 courtesans, dressed in silks and velvets, began to dance for the assembled guests. What followed challenged even the broad definitions of acceptable behavior. As Burchard recorded with characteristic precision, the women initially danced clothed, but as the evening progressed and wine continued to flow, garments were gradually discarded until the entertainers performed completely nude. The centerpiece of the evening involved the chestnuts that gave the banquet its name. Servants placed candelabras on the floor around the room, creating pools of flickering light separated by areas of shadow. Chestnuts were scattered across the floor, and the nude courtesans were instructed to crawl on their hands and knees to collect them, their bodies illuminated by candlelight as they moved through the improvised obstacle course. Pope Alexander VI, according to Burchard's account, watched these proceedings from a seat of honor, accompanied by Cesare and Lucrezia. The presence of the Pope's daughter at such an event has puzzled historians for centuries. Was she a willing participant or a victim of circumstances beyond her control? The final phase of the entertainment involved competitions among the male guests to see who could achieve sexual relations with the greatest number of courtesans. Prizes were offered, and the competitions were conducted publicly, with servants keeping score, transforming intimate human connection into a spectacle for papal amusement. Burchard's account of these events was preserved in the Vatican's secret archives, sealed away from public view for centuries. When Pope Leo XIII opened the archives to researchers in the late 19th century, he expressed reluctance to allow access to documents that might damage Alexander VI's reputation. The fact that such caution was necessary more than 4 centuries later suggests the enduring power of the scandal Burchard had so carefully documented. The morning after the Banquet of Chestnuts found Rome unchanged on its surface, but fundamentally altered in its spiritual foundations. Pilgrims continued to arrive for Mass, and the Pope appeared for public audiences as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But knowledge of the previous evening's events spread through the city's network of servants, guards, and minor officials. Word of the banquet traveled beyond Rome through the diplomatic correspondence of foreign ambassadors, shocking even those who thought themselves immune to surprise about papal behavior. The political implications of the scandal extended far beyond questions of personal morality. Reformers throughout Europe, including figures like Girolamo Savonarola, seized upon reports of the banquet as evidence that the papacy had become irredeemably corrupt. Calls for church councils to depose Alexander VI gained new urgency, supported by detailed accounts of behavior that seemed to confirm the worst accusations. Alexander's response was characteristically defiant. Rather than expressing remorse, he intensified his support for Cesare's military campaigns and continued to live with the same magnificent excess that had characterized his entire papacy. If anything, The scandal seemed to liberate him from whatever restraints had previously limited his behavior. The Banquet of Chestnuts occurred near the end of Alexander's papacy, but it was not an isolated incident. Instead, it represented the logical culmination of years of steadily escalating corruption that had transformed the papal court into something unrecognizable to earlier generations of Christian believers. Cesare Borgia's career continued to flourish in the immediate aftermath of the scandal, suggesting that moral outrage had little impact on political calculations in Renaissance Italy. His military successes continued to earn praise from observers who admired effectiveness, regardless of the personal character of those who achieved it. Machiavelli's later analysis of Cesare's methods explicitly separated political skill from moral virtue, arguing that successful rulers must be willing to employ any means necessary to achieve their ends. But success built on such foundations proved temporary. Alexander Thix died on August 18, 1503, possibly from malaria, but surrounded by rumors of poisoning. His death brought immediate consequences for his children. Cesare's political support evaporated without papal protection, and he died fighting as a common mercenary in Spain just 4 years later. Lucrezia survived to become Duchess of Ferrara, but her later life was overshadowed by the notorious reputation of her family. The new Pope, Julius II, refused to occupy the Borgia apartments where the Banquet of Chestnuts had taken place. He moved to rooms on the floor above, which he commissioned Raphael to decorate. This physical relocation symbolized a broader attempt to distance the papacy from the moral failures of Alexander's reign, though the damage to the papal reputation proved more difficult to repair. Historical assessments of the banquet have varied. Catholic historians often disputed the accuracy of Borgia's account, while Protestant historians embraced the scandal as evidence supporting their criticisms of papal authority. Modern historians generally accept the basic accuracy of Borgia's account, placing it in the broader context of Renaissance Italian culture. They note that sexual displays and public entertainments involving prostitutes were not uncommon among secular rulers of the period, making Alexander's behavior shocking primarily because of his position as head of the Catholic Church. The architectural setting of the banquet adds another layer of historical irony. The rooms where the orgy occurred had been decorated by Pinturicchio with frescoes, depicting episodes from classical mythology and Christian history. Ancient gods and saints looked down from painted walls as scenes unfolded that would have scandalized both pagan and Christian sensibilities. The preservation of Burchard's diary in the Vatican's secret archives raises questions about the Church's relationship with its own history. The decision to maintain such records while restricting access to them suggests a recognition of their historical importance, combined with embarrassment about their contents. The scandal's impact on subsequent papal history cannot be measured solely in terms of immediate political consequences. Alexander Thix's behavior provided ammunition for Protestant reformers, like Martin Luther, who argued that the papacy itself had become irredeemably corrupt. The Counter-Reformation that began in the mid-16th century represented in part a response to scandals like the Banquet of Chestnuts. Church leaders recognized that moral reform was necessary to restore papal credibility and counter Protestant criticisms. The Council of Trent's emphasis on clerical discipline and the establishment of seminaries for priestly education addressed problems dramatically illustrated by Alexander Thix's conduct. The psychological impact of events like the Banquet of Chestnuts on participants and observers remains difficult to assess. For the courtesans, the experience probably represented professional obligation rather than personal degradation. For church officials, the evening may have represented either willing participation in corruption or reluctant compliance with papal expectations that carried the threat of professional retaliation. The broader Roman population's response reveals the complex relationship between religious authority and popular faith. Despite widespread awareness of Alexander's moral failures, pilgrims continued to flock to Rome, masses continued to be celebrated, and the sacramental system continued to function. This suggests that popular Catholicism had developed sufficient theological sophistication to distinguish between the personal worthiness of church officials and the validity of their religious functions. The Banquet of Chestnuts represents more than just an isolated incident of papal misconduct. It illuminates the broader transformation of Renaissance Italy from a medieval Christendom to an early modern European state system. Alexander VI's behavior reflected the values of secular princes who used luxury and spectacle to demonstrate power. But his position as spiritual leader of Catholic Christianity created contradictions that ultimately proved unsustainable. The evening of October 31st, 1501, thus stands as a watershed moment in papal history, the point at which the tension between spiritual authority and temporal power reached a crisis that demanded resolution. The scandal forced subsequent popes to choose between worldly magnificence and moral credibility, a choice that would shape the Catholic Church's development for centuries to come. As we look back across more than 5 centuries at that candlelit evening, we see reflections of humanity's eternal struggle between sacred aspirations and profane desires. The chestnuts scattered across the marble floors of papal chambers were humble fruits that became symbols of how far human dignity can fall when power escapes moral constraint. But what about you? What do you think was the most shocking part of this story? Share your thoughts below.